I'm Helen. Welcome to the Open University and our Facebook Live 60-minute chat on microgravity. Now, you might not stick with us the whole 60 minutes, but you're probably going to want to know who we are, what we're going to be doing and what's going on. So let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. My name's Helen Fraser and I'm a senior lecturer here in astronomy, and I do lots of research that involves microgravity. But I've got someone very important sitting beside me, and I'd like to ask him to introduce himself to you as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Andrew. I'm from the UK Space Agency. My job title is a bit of a mouthful. I'm the Human Spaceflight and Microgravity Programme Manager. That basically means I try and coordinate the likes of Helen, who are doing science in microgravity conditions.
So, the reason we're doing this is probably because you've tuned in and seen our 60-second Adventures in Microgravity series. You've probably watched our videos and seen that one is all about what is microgravity, one is about the vomit comet, one is about bed rest, and one is about space bugs. And over the next hour we're going to take each of those subjects in turn and try and tell you a little bit about the science, what it means, what lies behind it, perhaps explain it in more detail. But what's really important is we just don't want to sit here and talk at you. This isn't a lecture, this is a Facebook Live. So what we really would like is for you guys, under the feed that you're seeing right now, please ask questions. Sitting over on the other side of the room where you can't see out of the camera, we've got a great team of Ben and Sabrina, both of whom are research scientists who work in microgravity research. They're all ready and prepared to answer your questions, and they're going to be picking out the very best ones and feeding them back to myself and Andrew so we can answer them later on. And we're going to keep asking you over and over again. Keep passing us those questions. But Andrew, perhaps you'd like to tell everyone what's going to be coming up in the next hour.
So we're going to take a bit of a whistle-stop tour through all the various things one can do in microgravity, and I guess crucially trying to answer why. So we have all kinds of weird and wonderful contraptions we use to simulate microgravity, such as this, which you'll hear more about later. This is David Cullen's random positioning machine, which we'll talk a bit more about later in the chat. And if you want to find out why you might use a bottle on a parabolic flight, then make sure you stay tuned.
And perhaps you'd like to know why we've even got a helium balloon. We're not about to have a party. We do love microgravity. We do celebrate a lot when our experiments go well. But if you just wait a few moments, we're going to start thinking about the balloon and how that helps us with microgravity. Okay, well, probably where we really want to start is by having a look at why we started this 60 seconds at all. So I'd just like to ask Andrew to tell you a little bit about where the UK Space Agency thought we should come from and how we got the money here at the Open University to produce those videos that David Mitchell has voiced over for us and all those great animators and illustrators have done. Andrew.
Right, so the great thing about our microgravity research program really is that it crosses so many different elements. It uses lots of different platforms and different facilities to simulate a lack of gravity or the effects of a lack of gravity. And it also enables all kinds of different types of science, from astrobiology to zoology, fundamental physics, fluid physics, human research, so all different branches of science. And that's the strength of the programme. That also makes it quite difficult for a policy maker or a funder like the UK Space Agency to sometimes present that work, because it can be quite a daunting whole. But one of the fun things about microgravity research, I think, is that it really captures the imagination. It really reaches the parts that other science programmes can't reach, let's say.
Out of this world research in some ways.
Yeah, there's lots of puns we can make, and we do. So one of the things we're keen to promote is to try and capitalise on that fascination with microgravity to do outreach. And so we had a funding call last year for novel approaches to outreach, and this was one of them. We know that the OU has this really strong brand of 60-second adventures, kind of quick snapshots. I was quite sceptical, I must say, that you could reduce our wonderful work down to 60-second segments, but I'm sure everyone at home that's seen the videos has seen what a great job has been done, especially with David Mitchell's voiceovers. So that's really where the OU came in.
Yeah, Andrew, it's great. Thank you very much. So we actually are really lucky today to have with us Catherine Chambers, who's been the producer of the 60-second series since it started. So if you don't mind, we're going to ask Catherine to nip behind us here and just come and join us for a moment and tell us just a little bit about the 60-second adventures. Catherine.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Say hi to all our viewers.
Hello, viewers. Hello.
So how are you? Put Peg down.
I'm
There.
well, thank you. Yes,
Very good.
I'm well. Good
Yeah.
to join
she's,
you both.
she's been behind the camera directing us, and now she's in front of the camera.
Yes.
We've grabbed her just for a few moments. But this was really your baby right from the start. Do you just want to tell us something about the 60-second series very briefly?
Yes, okay, Helen. So this is the 5th series now that we've worked on. It all started back in 2011 with 60-second adventures in thought, where we decided to explore paradoxes and thought experiments in a fun way. And the whole point of it, of the series sense is about making complex concepts accessible. And we thought we'd use comedy as a genre to do that. Find a comedy writer, because as much as academics are great, writing comedy is a skill. And the storytelling is driven by the characterisation and the comedy and the writing, and it's been a blast throughout the series. They've been incredibly popular. We've covered, since thought experiments, we've covered economics, we've covered religion, we've covered astronomy, and now we've covered microgravity.
Very good. And what's been your best bit about doing microgravity, actually?
Well, I think the challenge is always, with astronomy as well as microgravity, is obviously, keeping the science in, but making that entertaining and making that accessible. And quite often with these, it's often what you leave out as much as what you leave in. So that's been quite a challenge, but I think it's been an enjoyable experience.
It has. We've all had a lot of fun doing it. Have you had
Yes.
fun watching them? Because you've only seen them really at the other end when we've presented
Absolutely,
them back
yeah,
to
no,
you.
it's nice to see these complex subjects kind of distilled down into, yeah, it's definitely one of the more fun parts of my job has been sitting back and watching the videos.
Very good. Okay, Catherine, thank you very much. We'll let you get back behind the camera. That's Catherine, everybody, whose idea this was. And I must say it's been a lot of fun for us working with her as scientists. We've really learnt a lot, and it's one of the great things about the Open University, that it gives us as academics a chance not just to do our research, but to do things like this. Well, just before we move on and start looking at our very first 60-second adventure, I thought I would point out to you these posh pieces of paper that are here. Andrew mentioned earlier on, talking to policymakers, and one of the things I do, because I chair one of the advisory boards to UK Space Agency, is we help advise them on making these kinds of documents. I don't know if someone wants to hold that a little bit closer to the camera so people can see the front for a moment. But we have this document here. It's called the National Strategy on Space Environments and Human Spaceflight. You can find it on the internet, and it's a very dry and important document that actually covers quite a lot of the points we're going to cover today, but in a very different way, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of these things where perhaps for general readership it's not going to be the best bedtime reading, but I think it's quite good for the UK that we actually have a national strategy. So it's more the fact that we have one, and it's showing, I think, a really positive direction for research in this area.
Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at what is microgravity. So for those of you who are looking for the right video start, now we'll get there. We're going to have a look at what is microgravity. There we go. Fantastic. Excellent job. Da-da-da. So Andrew.
Yeah, so we've been banding this term about microgravity, and I guess if you speak English you might figure out that it means a very small amount of gravity, and we use an environment with microgravity to study all kinds of things, as I've mentioned. But first, I think to understand what microgravity is, we need to understand what gravity is. So you're the physicist.
Yeah, I guess
explain.
that's my job. So what is gravity? Well, those of you standing or sitting at home in your rooms are probably sitting on a chair like me, and you can probably feel quite simply that you're sitting down in the chair. You're being pulled down towards the centre of the earth, and the chair is pushing back against you. The difficulty is that, well, it's kind of a question really. If astronauts are floating in the space station, Andrew, does that mean there's no gravity there?
Well, what lots of people think is that as soon as you get 400 kilometres above the Earth, suddenly there's no gravity. If you think about it for a second longer, obviously this can't be true, because we have gravity that pulls the moon towards the Earth and the Earth towards the sun, or around the sun rather. So it's not the case that astronauts are truly weightless. It's more that they're in free fall. They're constantly falling around the Earth just as the International Space Station is falling around the Earth. So essentially they're in free fall.
So we might have to think about these difficult physics concepts, I think. So we're going to have a little look. We've got a little box. I wonder if I can get one of my taskmasters just to pass me over the green box of goodies that's over here. Maybe Andrew can just reach over and grab the box. And I'm just going to pass these ones out the way so that we don't damage the ones we don't need at the moment. Very good. So we're gonna put this box down beside me, and I'm going to dip in it at various points in time. Very good. So so I have first of all here. Oh, I have a balloon that's flying away. Let me just sort that out. See, this is not rehearsed. It's truly live. We can't even control the balloons. So by the way, just while I'm setting this up, let me remind you. Please keep posting your questions. Get those questions flying in. I see Ben and Sabrina rapidly typing away to lots of different people. But in a few minutes, we're going to take a pause and take some of those questions. So really get those questions coming in on Facebook. So hopefully you can all see here some scales. Maybe I can weigh the hefty human spaceflight policy. But of course, what I do if I put something with some kind of mass on a scale, it registers some kind of number. I don't know what that number is from here. Oh, not very much, but enough. I'll borrow the glass a minute. I'll pop the glass in there. That should be a little bit heavier. Yeah, there we go. Very nice. Just about, 400 grams or so. So you can see that when we have a gravitational force acting on something with a mass, we end up with measuring a weight. In microgravity, we end up with weightlessness. And weightlessness is the perception that really gravity isn't acting. So to understand that in terms of the space station and the astronauts, we need to think about motion in a circle. And if I look very carefully here, I have a wonderful little demonstration that I can give you. It's a cup, a little plastic cup. And perhaps I can ask you just to show it towards the camera. And I'd hold on to the cup. Just going to show inside of the cup to the camera. Can everybody see it's filled with some rice? Very good, excellent. I'll have that back now. Now I'm going to pass this to Andrew, and we're going to hopefully pan the picture out a little bit, because you can try this at home, especially any kids watching. Just go downstairs, find a cup, put it on a piece of string, fill it of course with some rice. Now of course if I was to just tip the cup and the rice like this, of course the rice falls out on my hand and I can put it back in again. That's because gravity is acting on the rice and it falls out the cup. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Andrew, without knocking all the water jugs over, to move that in a circle. Do you think you can whiz that round in a circle and make sure the rice doesn't fall out?
Well, either I can or I can't. Let's see.
Yeah, I'll sit back.
So, here we go.
Okay, can everyone see that? Excellent. I'll let you stop that carefully.
There we go.
Excellent job. Wow. Okay, give me a round of applause while you're at home. Fantastic, thank you very much. Give Andrew a round of applause, very good. So, what kept the rice in the cup? Well, what kept the rice in the cup is the centripetal force. And the centripetal force essentially pushes out from the centre of a circle. So when an object is travelling in a circle, there's a force pushing outwards. And when we're on something like the International Space Station, with, say, Tim Peake, an astronaut, then we have gravity acting in one direction, and we have the centripetal force acting in another, and that basically means that the forces are roughly balancing each other, and we experience what we perceive as weightlessness. It appears that there's no gravitational force acting on our body. Now, it's not always true that everything that is well balanced is weightless. So I have a balloon here. And here I have a balloon. Now, if I let it go, I better not let it go too far. Andrew, are you ready to grab this? Because I don't want it to go up the spiral staircase. So, if I let go of this balloon, ready, steady, go, it will float upwards. Can everybody see that? It's not too bad. It's floating.
Got it.
Okay, so it's full of helium, and helium is lighter than air, so it has a lifting force, and it floats upwards. Now, if I tip the rice that was earlier in my cup into this basket under the balloon and let go, the great thing is it stays on the table. Now that should mean that if I tip almost all the rice out, and this may take me a little bit of time to achieve, yes, I've really got to have only a little tiny bit, just a few grains of rice. hold very carefully. No, even a few more. We'll keep going, it will work. Still more. You did say 2 or 3. I should listen to all my co-workers, my co-researchers, because they say 2 or 3 grains. Still 1 more, 2 more. Fingers in. Ah. Never worked with grains of rice. Let me just see. Rice is more sticky than I realised. Okay, let me try again.
There we go.
Can you see that that is floating in the middle of the air? It's now rising ever so slightly. But can you see that basically the forces are balanced? The force lifting the balloon and the force, the gravitational force acting on the balloon are basically equal and opposite. Now, if I just give that to Andrew for a minute to play with, and I come over here, I think there's a pair of scissors. I'm looking for a pair of scissors. Maybe one of my esteemed colleagues can give me a pair of scissors. Now we're going to demonstrate that unfortunately this thing is not currently weightless. If you've ever been in a hot air balloon, thank you so much. This is going to give you your honours.
It's my job, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you've ever been in a hot air balloon, you'll know very well that actually you don't feel weightless when you're in the basket. But if you look very carefully, when I balance this and then Andrew cuts the string, for a short second, the cup was falling through the air. And for that short second when it was falling through the air, it was, to all intents and purposes, bearing in mind that we might have some air resistance, basically weightless. It was experiencing microgravity. And that's exactly what happens when we're scientists and we're in a drop tower. Andrew, what's a drop tower?
Disappointingly enough, it's nothing more than a tower you drop things down. Which sounds like a lot of fun, but also it can be pretty useful, because in that moment when things are falling, they're essentially, as we've demonstrated, weightless. So you can use a drop tower to get, only for a couple of seconds, but get a true picture of how things are in the absence of the effects of gravity. So scientists use this for all kinds of different experiments.
Okay, fantastic. I'm getting some information that we've got some great questions coming in. So I'm wondering if we can just perhaps take some of those questions for a few minutes and then we'll come back to talking about the drop tower and in particular how UK scientists are using drop towers to do their experiments. Okay. Do you want to read this one? Probably. Can you?
Right, so it's a nice question from Jen Head. Is there anywhere in space that doesn't have gravity?
Haha! That is a fantastic question, Jen. And actually, the answer is probably no. The problem is that anything that has a mass has gravitational force. Even my pen, even my phone, even me, even Andrew. And gravity is an attractive force. It's not a repulsive force. That means it pulls things towards each other. And actually, it's a force that requires something that's very, very big. So black holes, they have a large gravitational force. Galaxies have a big gravitational force. Stars have a big gravitational force. Planets, moons, all of those kinds of things, they all have gravitational forces. So if we wanted to find a space anywhere in the universe where we had no gravity, we'd probably have to be infinitely far away from anything with mass, and that's also an impossible place to be. But it's a brilliant question. And do you know, Jen Head, who gave us this question, it was a question that myself, about 4 academics, Catherine, the illustrator and the animator, all discussed for about 3 hours when we were first starting this this process of actually writing the scripts for the 60 seconds. So thanks for that question, it was brilliant. Do we have another question? Oh, fantastic. So we have a question that says, what does it feel like to pee in space? And that's from somebody called Sasamoa. And I am guessing that he is a very cheeky chappy because he knows that later on we are going to come back to some interesting things about this. So Sass, thank you very much for your question. But you know what? I'm going to let you wait a little while longer before you find out the answer to that one. Are we good? Excellent. Okay, let's just go back just before we move on to the next area and just talk about Andrew. Who in the UK is trying to use drop towers for their experiments, and what kind of things are those scientists doing? What areas? What are they working in?
So quite a nice, timely example is up at Leeds at the Institute of Materials Research. They have their own drop tower there, and so they drop samples of essentially molten metals, so very hot liquid metals, and then when it's in free fall and in a microgravity state, they can observe the fundamental properties of those metals better. And this is kind of a corollary of what some of the science that Tim Peake is doing on the ISS in the current 6 months, where they have a furnace on board and they melt metals, use high-speed cameras and all kinds of other clever sensors to get a really true picture of what the thermophysical properties of that metal are, which isn't just out of curiosity. Using the data they get from that, they can then make new metals. They can feed it into computer models to better understand how to make new alloys, which can be used for various industrial processes, making more lightweight or more conductive materials.
All right, yeah, I've actually sat in conferences sometimes when people have been talking about these experiments, and I think it's even had impacts in things like, you know, without mentioning any names, big companies making turbines for jet engines. You can't mention that, but I can mention that. And so I've heard a lot of things about, you know, when we're trying to make, especially spacecraft, sort of lighter so they're more fuel efficient, they're good for the environment. It's quite surprising that really fundamental research in microgravity and on the space station is basically helping us with addressing that problem here on Earth.
Yeah, it always sounds kind of esoteric. Yeah, we're going to melt some metal in space, but it really is with kind of very direct applications on it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to move on a little bit and we're going to talk to you about our next 60-second adventure. Okay, the vomit comet. Hi guys, welcome back. So you'll notice that I've had a bit of change of personnel beside me for a few moments. This is Ben Rositis.
Yes.
Ben, perhaps you'd just briefly like to introduce yourselves to the audience.
Hello, so I'm Dr. Ben Rositis. I'm a research fellow here at the Open University, and I did some Parabolic Flight experiments several years ago. So.
Can I ask also? Can we just have a swap of box, possibly, for my sins, because I need my next box. Thank you. Great. So yeah, so you, like me, have actually been on a parabolic flight.
Yes.
So I don't know, but I am guessing that I've lost my bottle, guys. That sounds very worrying. Don't worry, audience. I haven't lost my bottle. Oh, I see. Thank you very much. You, like me, have been on a parabolic flight.
That's right.
And I thought it would be really interesting to talk to you a little bit about how that felt and what it was like.
Oh,
so can I just remind you while we're having this conversation, you know, don't forget this is a live chat. We'd love to be able to interact with you to answer your questions. Ben has actually been sitting over there answering questions as they've come in. So now you're seeing it, putting a face to the name. But do keep those questions coming. We'd love to have those questions and know what's going on. So Ben, can you tell me a little bit how was it for you when you had a parabolic flight?
Oh, it was a great experience for us, and it was quite unlike anything else. So, I remember the first time I went to microgravity, microgravity quite well. It was like jumping into like a pool of really cold water. Like my body went into like temporary shock. It was like I found it difficult to breathe, and I didn't know which way was up. But I soon quite quickly adapted to the unusual environment. I quickly realised that the aircraft ceiling was up and the aircraft floor was down. But I still had I felt unbalanced all the time. So when I was in the plane, I was constantly pretending I was swimming just to try and get my balance.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So when we're in the aeroplane, we do the parabolas. The parabolas themselves is where we have the microgravity. It lasts about 22 seconds. And we do that around 31 times in a flight. And in between we have these what are called hyper-G phases. They're about 2G phases. How did you find that hyper-G phase?
I didn't like the hyper-G phase at all. It was like, so they recommend that you lie down because that minimises the effects, but I did try sitting up during some of them and I just totally felt the blood rushing from my head quite quickly, feeling very sick and disorientated, so I thought during the 2G phase I'll just lie down instead. That was enough for me.
I have to agree with you. You know, I was always really happy to be lying down in the 2G phase. I found initially it was quite hard, like you, in the 0G, but I'm a scuba diver, so having neutral buoyancy is quite normal, and I actually felt it was really like scuba diving. I don't know if there's anyone out there who does scuba dive, but to me it felt quite like that, scuba diving, but without the water. and without a regulator, so it was quite nice.
Yeah, I've done scuba diving before, and I would say it's the same, but there's no concept of up or down.
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. No. yeah. Did you have to? It sounds really dodgy, this, but for all the little children watching, we will clarify the question in a moment before your parents switch off. Did you have to take drugs before you went on the flight?
Oh, they gave me an injection of a really strong anti-motion sickness medication, which helped a lot during the flight.
How did it make you feel?
Well, beforehand it made me really hyperactive, so I was like jumping around all over the place.
Yeah.
And then, I know during the actual flight it was fine for most of it, but I felt the effects started to wear off towards the end. And then when I was back down on Earth, it actually gave me land sickness. Like I couldn't see, the land felt it was like moving all over the place. And eventually, once it worn off, I felt like I had a hangover from it. So
yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you there. It does feel like one too many gin and tonics, and then I had a little snooze, and then it felt a bit better. I did actually look it up. It's a drug called, it's lovely. We've got some pictures here of me in microgravity floating around. The drug, if in case there's any doctors listening and watching, is scopolamine, which I believe is a drug that's used in long-term bed rest patients to stop build-up of fluid in the lungs. And it does say don't operate machinery, don't do anything that requires any concentration. Okay, we're just going to pause for a minute, Ben, because I think we've got a few more questions coming in. Maybe just before we take these questions, maybe you've got questions to me and Ben about what it was like, or questions about those things. Bear in mind, we're going to come on in a minute to this thing. So just leave that there, but we'll come on to that. Okay. Perhaps I can give you this one. There's a guy called Andy Fiddler. Hi, Andy. He's asked us, why is it called the vomit comet?
So, we sort of like already touched on this a bit with the anti-motion sickness medication. So basically, as Hannah mentioned, we get 31 parabolas. So we are constantly alternating between twice gravity, microgravity, twice gravity, in a brief period of 1G, and then repeating through 2G, microgravity, 2G again. So whilst this is happening on the plane, your blood is constantly rushing in and out of your head, and that makes you feel rather sick. So some people can't tolerate that, end up feeling very, very sick, and they may have to actually vomit, which is why they call it the vomit comet.
Sadly, I don't know if it's like this for you, but actually at the end of the flight, they often carry black bags of sick down off the plane and throw them away. I've never been sick on the plane.
No, I wasn't.
No, but it does sound quite horrible, because usually everybody finds one part of the parabola different. For me, the worst part of the parabola was going from 2G back to 1G, actually, at the very end. But some people really don't like the 2G phase, and that's most of the time when people are sick. And some people who do human physiology experiments, they have to stand up all the time, so it's very hard for them. The blood rushes to their feet, and they feel very heavy. Imagine feeling twice as heavy sort of instantaneously when you've just felt weightless. It's not a very nice feeling, I can tell you. And when the sick hits the floor, it kind of makes a thudding noise. It's really quite gross. But we do this in the name of science. We love it, really. We do. Which kind of leads me to the next question. And for that, I'm just going to grab Andrew, perhaps, to come back in for a moment. Maybe Ben, you want to jump in the middle, because we haven't finished with you yet. But unlucky. There's a question by My Microgravity. That's a cool username. That says, what are the most significant discoveries enabled by microgravity research? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can start with the significant discoveries in the UK, and then perhaps further afield.
Okay. Well, the one I was mentioning earlier about the lighter weight materials, I mean, that has led to a reduction of weight of 40 to 50% for gas turbine blades, which is a really significant discovery. Also, as part of the same project, which is a big pan-European programme with lots of British industry and researchers involved, they developed a new catalyst for industrial processes, which not the most exciting thing, but in terms of the economic and environmental savings is really significant.
Perhaps I can just sort of interject for a moment and say maybe some of you don't know what a catalyst is, but often when you do chemical reactions, they go at a certain rate or speed. Those of you who are at school will probably know, because you do it over a Bunsen burner with a test tube. Some of you might not know, but sometimes you can make them go faster if you have a catalyst involved. It just helps the interaction. Is there anything sort of more wider, more sort of global that also people have looked at in terms of microgravity research?
Well, there's many things. Where to start? So in terms of physiology, there's been real advances in our understanding of osteoporosis, which is weakening of the bones, which affects many people, particularly in older age. So the advances in microgravity have come from microgravity research, looking at how astronauts respond to being in space. Because one of the strange things, and the mechanism isn't entirely understood yet, but astronauts in space lose a significant amount of their bone and muscle density. So research into why that's happening has led to new osteoporosis treatments on Earth.
Yeah, very recently I was at ESA and they were talking about it, and it was very interesting actually, because they were looking at only certain bones, and they've started to look at different bones, and they've discovered that there are certain bones that lose density during flight, and certain ones after flight, and certain ones even later than that, and some recover better than others. It's amazing. Okay, well, Andrew, I'm just going to grab Ben back for one last chat about the vomit comet before we move on. Keep your questions coming. These are brilliant questions, by the way, and we will keep answering those we're not picking up here, because we're really enjoying the questions. So, Ben, do you know what this is used for?
It looks like a toilet for a parabolic flight.
It does look like a toilet for a parabolic flight. Guys, so Sass, you asked how do we go to the toilet in space? Well, Tim Peake, luckily, doesn't have to take a lot of these with him. But in Parabolic Flight, this is our toilet. And it is unisex toilet, so you can use your imagination, unfortunately. In fact, the aeroplane we go on has no toilet at all. It just has a room. You can imagine that if I just give you this glass of water, in 1G, the water sits nicely at the bottom of the glass. And in 2G, it sits very much at the bottom of the glass. But in 0G, it floats around. So unfortunately, one can't have a toilet on an aeroplane, because in the 0G phase, everything would float out and float all around the toilet. And then in the 2G phase, it would splat down wherever it was. Now, I'm not going to mention any particular airlines. We've all been on a transatlantic flight where at the end, the toilet is not perhaps in the state it was at the beginning. But we try to avoid that in a parabolic flight, and we use one of these. And the very important thing is, when you go on the parabolic flight, not to forget the lid. Because you have to do your business, do up the lid, then you have to go and find the rubbish bin, put it in the rubbish bin, and put the elastic band back over the rubbish bin. And that's another of the different black carrier bags that leaves the plane at the other end. Ben, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'll let you get back to answering the questions. Okay, just to finish off then, before we go one more place, I just wanted to ask Andrew to join me again. And yeah, everyone's playing musical chairs except me. And just the very final thing I wanted to ask you, Andrew, was I know I go on parabolic flights. Ben's been on parabolic flights. You've all seen what we do on parabolic flights in our Vomit Comet video. Are other people in the UK, just briefly, working on parabolic flights?
Yeah, so it's one of these things which is quite convenient and easy to access. The ones we use under the European Space Agency's programme, they all fly out of Bordeaux, so not too far from here. Marco Marengo, who's a researcher down at the University of Brighton, he's in Bordeaux at the moment, actually, on a parabolic flight campaign. And he's interested in how liquids flow differently in the absence of gravity. And this is so you can develop new cooling systems. So essentially have a closed loop in a kind of snaking shape, and the way the liquid flows through this can then be used to cool down electronic systems. So that could be used for solar panels or well, anywhere where you need cooling.
And I understand that some people are even trying to develop 3D printers for space. Is this true?
Yes, this is something that gets lots of press attention because 3D printing is cool. But no, there's some quite pioneering work in the UK at the moment doing 3D printing with metals in microgravity. It's been done with plastics on the space station already, but a plastic wrench isn't going to get you very far. But if you could print a metal tool whilst you're in space, that could be incredibly useful rather than having to fly up every tool just in case you need it. So they've been testing these on parabolic flights. Oh, wow. Okay. Fantastic. So perhaps you didn't realise that all these things are actually going on, and really led by people here in the UK. Okay, we're going to change gear a little bit now, and we're going to talk about our very next video, which is all about bed rest.
time before we started doing that one. How are you? Tell me when my face is going red, everybody. Is my face going red yet? This does look slightly mad, doesn't it? But what I'm trying to show here is what it's like for people who are in bed rest. They lie down for at least 6 months with their head tipped upside down. Now you can probably see up my nose and my face is going red and it's not a comfy position to talk to you from. So I'm going to sit up now. Excuse me.
Would you like a hand?
I love my hand, thank you. Okay, oh, feel a bit dizzy.
So that was amusing for everyone, but why the hell did you do that, Helen?
Well, actually, I wanted to sort of show people what's actually going on, and I do feel a bit lightheaded. When astronauts go to space, I think somewhere we've got a picture and an image of Tim Peake. You'll all hopefully know who Tim Peake is. And just to let my colleagues find it, we're going to pop a picture in front of the screen for you of Tim before and after he went into space flight. And I was actually with a crowd of 5-year-olds on Monday who worked out the answer to this. So I'm just going to ask you, don't move the picture yet. Thank you. I'm just going to ask you to spot the difference. Send us a message. Tell us what the difference is. Give you a few seconds, see if anyone's going to get a message in. Can you spot the difference? Well, if you look really carefully, a little bit like me, in one of the pictures, Tim's face is a bit puffier, rounder. He's not getting fatter in space. He's just quite simply suffering the effects of microgravity. Okay, let's move that one out of the way now. And what happens is basically, you can imagine while I'm sitting here, my heart is pumping blood around my body, Andrew. And of course, as it pumps to my feet, it has to work with gravity, and then to return the blood, it's working against gravity. But to get to my head, it's really got to work against gravity in the first place. So my whole body is set up to send blood to my head with a lot of pressure. You know, got a huge jugular vein and artery and everything else. And of course, when I go upside down, my body hasn't yet worked out that it doesn't need to do that. So lots of blood goes to my head, and it goes very red very quickly because suddenly I've sort of taken gravity out of the equation. And that's what happens in space, and that's what bed rest does as well. And I think we have some researchers in the UK that do this kind of bed rest.
So, I mean, the thing about this increased fluid in the top half of your body, and particularly in your head, is it's not just a bad look. It can actually be quite bad for your health. If you think about increasing pressure inside your skull, one of the real challenges for astronauts at the moment is this increased pressure pressing against the back of their eyeballs, and we think that this is causing quite bad eye problems. Now, the relevance of that for bed rest is that by simulating this effect of being in space, we can then use a much bigger cohort of people rather than the few people we have in space to kind of study the effects of it, and crucially ways to alleviate that and to monitor it more accurately.
Is there a way of actually measuring this?
Well,
this pressure in the head?
traditionally you'd have to either do a lumbar puncture, so that's in the bottom of your spine, or drill into your skull.
Don't fancy that either, really.
Unpleasant on Earth, but I reckon even less pleasant in space. So there's a new device which has been pioneered by a spin-out company from the University of Southampton, which essentially just sits in the ear and monitors tiny movements in the eardrum, and from these movements it can tell changes in brain pressure. So that's quite useful for astronauts, but really the reason it was initially developed was for in acute emergency scenarios on Earth.
Oh wow!
So responders can instantly get a measurement of somebody's brain pressure, which is one of the vital signs for somebody's health. Also, if somebody's confined to bed for long duration due to illness, then it can be used in that situation as well, without having to go through invasive procedures.
Wow, so this means the kinds of technologies that are being used for astronauts, all this sort of out-of-this-world space technology, is actually being used sort of every day in our hospitals in the UK in some places.
Absolutely, yeah.
To help patients.
And
wow.
that's something we're always quite keen on in this country, is making sure that it's not just benefiting. We loved him and we want him to be well,
yeah.
but we'd like all 65 million of us to be well. So making sure that our research is really kind of relevant for everyone. Yeah.
That's very important, isn't it? Yeah, when we do research as scientists, we want to learn and know and understand, but we also want to sort of improve our lives and have societal benefits. Mm-hmm. So is this sort of blood and head pressure the only thing that people really study with bed rest?
No, there's many different effects on your body, and being confined to bed rest for up to 6 months, some of them go on for. Really mimics lots of the conditions of being in space. So I mentioned earlier the muscle and bone wasting. When you're lying down, it kind of simulates the lack of loading on your body that you also experience in space, and that accelerates bone and muscle loss. They use them to study new techniques for rehabilitation. So yeah, there's quite a few different effects of being in space, being in bed rest. And I think we have another question.
We
Should we
do
take that
have
now?
another question. Yeah, do you want to? I think I ought to be able to ask this, but maybe we both have something. So we have a question. It says, is there potential for humans to be able to evolve to live permanently in space, basically?
Theoretically, yes. It's one of those things that, I mean, all species are evolving. It's going to take a very, very long time, and it'll take many, many generations of living in space. But our bodies are always adapting to their environment, so in theory, yes, but it's probably not in our lifetime.
I must admit that there are people who look at evolution. I've been on a parabolic flight when there were stick insects, and they were stuck to a cage. And when you saw the videos of these insects, the first few parabolas, they were swimming about like Ben was describing. And then after a few parabolas, they worked out that it didn't matter. They normally use gravity to work out when they need to suck on and stick on or not. And they pretty quickly adapted. I think the biggest challenge, probably if we were permanently living in space, might be reproduction, actually. Not the process of doing it, but the process of actually what happens when the offspring is born. I know I was very heavily pregnant, like probably 38 weeks when I should have gone on a parabolic flight. And I wasn't allowed to fly, strangely. I can't imagine why. But I have heard that subsequently a female NASA astronaut did fly at 6 months pregnant, with no adverse effects, by the way, on her child that is now born and living and just doing fine. But it is very interesting, because if you were permanently... the child beforehand, it might be absolutely fine when it's protected in the mother's womb. But if you were, say, born on Mars and then grew up on Mars, you're in a very different gravitation environment. You may never be able to come back to the Earth.
Exactly,
That's a different challenge, isn't it?
Mm.
But I think we're a little bit far away from that for
Luckily,
now.
one we don't need to worry
Yeah.
about just yet.
Okay. Well, keep those questions coming. We've got about 15 minutes left, so we'd really like to keep those questions coming. What we'd like to do now is move on to the last video and talk to you a little bit about that. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about space bugs, and I think we have somewhere a cleaning spray, just like the one that you saw, hopefully, in the video. Do we have a cleaning spray? Ah, Catherine, fantastic. So, I know you saw this. You probably found it funny in the video, a nice little cleaning spray. Let me just do that. Let me just spray it. You've finished your drink, haven't you? I don't want to. So, when I spray it on Earth, of course, I don't know if you can see this. And you see it spraying in the air, absolutely fantastic. So it sprays, but if you watch very carefully, if I spray it high enough, what happens? Eventually the stuff falls down. Yeah, the table's pretty wet now. The great thing about using one of these and spraying it or spraying it on Earth is eventually the sort of antibacterial stuff lands on a surface and we can wipe it all about. The problem in the space station is it floats about. You can't really use antibacterial spray in the space station. It's not very helpful. And in actual fact, there's something even worse. When they get water or moisture or condensation in one particular corner, that's the corner where they're most likely to get bugs. And the big question becomes, are those bugs more virulent? Are they more dangerous? Are they going to make us sick? Are they going to grow quicker? And actually at the beginning of the space program, we were very concerned about it, and we have a lot of controls over sending things into space, not to take our bugs and put them somewhere else. It's all pretty difficult. So Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about how people are looking at bugs in space and what they're finding out?
Yeah, so it's, like you said, it's one of these things that we were very concerned about, and it was believed for a long time that bugs did indeed become more dangerous in space. Actually, a recent review of work by Peter Taylor from the London School of Pharmacy concluded that it wasn't the bugs themselves that were becoming more dangerous, it's actually that astronauts were becoming less resistant to them. So the problem's the same, but the cause is slightly different. Mm-hmm. And if we understand that cause better, then we can respond to it better. Also, the way bacteria move in space is different. the lack of gravity doesn't affect the bacteria directly so much, but whatever medium they're living in, whatever liquid they're in, will obviously be affected by the lack of gravity. So that affects how they move.
Yeah, it's very fascinating, isn't it? It's really unusual. And in actual fact, as scientists, especially scientists here at the Open University, where we're really interested in sort of a lot of things, space and astronomy, and I think a lot of you have heard a lot of us talk about those things. We actually do something slightly different with bugs. We don't just take them into the microgravity environment, but we have colleagues and people here who are interested in not putting them inside the space station, but putting them outside the space station and having a look not just how the microgravity, but also how the harsh radiation environment really affects those bugs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask you, keep bringing in those questions. We're going to have a question slot again in just a moment, but we're really lucky today to have a colleague of mine with us here from Cranfield University, Dave Cullen, and he's brought with him a wonderful contraption. So Dave, I don't know if you and your contraption want to come and join us. I'm going to let you sit here for a moment and just have a little chat with Andrew about what you've been doing. So let me swap places with you.
Okay.
So, when we talk about gravity, microgravity and so on, we often talk about artificial gravity because that's quite important. Spinning things is often proposed as a way to create gravity, like with the centripetal force experiment we were showing earlier. So when I first saw this, I thought, why are you spinning things around to simulate microgravity? Aren't you doing completely the opposite of what you should do? So maybe you could tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, so this is something called a random positioning machine. It's not finished, hence the reason why we happen to move it with our fingers and with bits of string and such. So it's work in progress. But I mean, my interests are kind of building experiments and instrumentation to study biology in space, and therefore we need ways of simulating that kind of space environment, microgravity, before we send things into space. So you've heard about kind of drop towers, which give you a couple of seconds, parabolic flight, which gives you about 30, 40 seconds burst. For those experiments where you need to have a much longer duration simulation of microgravity, we use this, at least for some types of experiment. And all we do is mount the experiment or a sample in the centre, and then, as you say, we kind of slowly rotate at about that kind of speed. And if you think about if the sample experiment mounted on the centre there, what it is seeing as it's randomly tumbling, is that gravity appears to be pulling at 1 second in one direction, the next second in a different direction. And and this is the key thing, if the property we want to understand of that sample responds to gravity slowly enough, it averages, or it sees an average of gravity pulling everywhere, which means that there's an equal force in all directions, which again means that it sees an average net force of 0. So
Right.
it simulates microgravity because it randomizes the position, and as I said, as long as the feature we're interested in responds slowly enough, which in our case, for example, mammalian cell culture, so that's kind of artificial cultures of for example, human skin or human heart muscle, all kinds of things. Certain features of those cell cultures respond slowly enough that this has become a well-established way of simulating the effect of gravity on those types of samples before they go into space. Clearly it's subtly different. That's the reason why we still want to go into space, because if not we could use this to answer the questions, but it's a good enough simulation to make sure that our experiments are likely to give us sensible results when we send them into space.
Right, and I've heard that these things be used for larger organisms, so plants and things as well.
Yes, so this one is deliberately sized in our case because we're developing quite small experiments, but in other laboratories, not particularly common, but are much larger frames, so something where the actual kind of experimental platform is perhaps about that big and is rotated. But as you say, if you do spin it too quickly, then of course you are starting to impart other forces, so that then kind of basically distorts the kind of the experimental results. So there's a kind of sweet spot in the centre there, which or sweet kind of volume where we get a good simulation of microgravity.
Fantastic. So we showed the camera there, so it's just bang in the middle there. The sample goes.
Well, it's a small volume. It kind of
Right.
so it's a kind of few kind of square centimetres in there where we have a very low simulated microgravity environment, and the further you get it out, then the more it senses the spinning of the frames.
Right. Okay. Lovely stuff. Are we going to?
Yes, Dave.
Okay,
Thank you
very
ever so
much.
much.
No
Thank
problem.
you very much for coming and bringing
you.
your instrument.
Shall I take it away with me?
Yeah, carry it carefully because I think a leg's coming off at this side, so I need to break it entirely. Don't want to ruin your science before we start. So, those of you who saw the video, which talked about sort of spinning like a washing machine to grow the bugs that Peter works with to think about the space station go in a not dissimilar sort of random type positioning machine. We have one final guest who's just going to join me briefly before we wrap things up today. And that's Alex Price. He's a PhD student here at the Open University, but he works in the group that work on expose experiments. And just before I ask Alex to sort of come join Andrew and I, I'm going to ask him to put in front of the camera while Andrew and I are talking a rock which comes from, does it come from Beer? Is that where it comes from?
Yes.
It comes from Beer in Devon, from the Jurassic Coast. And it contains microbes or bugs inside it, and we're going to put it quite close to the camera in the hope that you can see that. We're just going to leave it there for a little bit while Andrew and I are talking. So, Andrew, there was great news from the International Space Station today that what the so-called R2 expose experiment, which was brought in during the Russian spacewalk in, I think, February of this year, it's been strapped to the outside of the space station for about 12 months. And that's going to come back down quite literally underneath Tim's bottom when he comes back down on the Soyuz in June. So the nice thing is Tim will get delivered safely, and more importantly, the science will get delivered safely back to Earth. But what is an expose experiment?
So basically, and it's not a fancy acronym. It does just expose small samples to the outside of the International Space Station. So they're subject not just to the lack of gravity, but to the different radiation that you get up there, the extreme vacuum, the extreme drying that you get when you're just exposed to the space environment. The reason we're interested in this is because one of the most kind of enduring questions in science is, where did life come from? How did it start on Earth? And so by better understanding the conditions in which life can and can't thrive, we can kind of narrow down the boundaries of where life might be in the universe and how it got here.
Yeah, great. So maybe, Alex, I can ask you to come and squat between us over here. Sorry, we don't have a posh studio enough to give you a third chair, but I'm sure you can manage. So Alex has brought this rock, which we mustn't touch. But Alex, tell us a little bit about this rock and what happened when the rock went to space. Well, perhaps not this particular piece, but a piece of it.
Not this exact piece. No, this is a sample of the rock from which the epilithic communities, these mixed communities, were taken and added to and sent up onto the ISS. So yeah, as you've already alluded to, they're exposed to extreme desiccation, so become very dry, in addition to high UV, which is very damaging to DNA, and extreme variation in temperatures as well. So looking at this can help us answer questions about a theory, for one thing, about a theory called panspermia, which is about whether or not biological material could be transferred between different planetary bodies, specifically Earth and Mars.
Alien hoppers.
Yeah, pretty much. Planet hoppers.
Now, if I remember, when these things went to the space station, though, and they were strapped on the outside, a lot of the, I'm going to call them bugs in there. They probably have some posh word, but I'm not a biologist. I'm sorry for the biologists out there, but I'm not a biologist. But a lot of them died. But if I recall, just a few of them lived. And what was the? Can you sort of simply tell us? You know, how did we find out which ones lived and which ones died? Did you?
Well, essentially, when they come back, they're in a very desiccated, dried out form, and you basically put them back into medium and see if they reanimate or not. And microbiology is very much a numbers game. So when you come to these extreme environments like this, quite often it's a very, very small percentage of things that will survive with these conditions. But if you have just 1%, then it can grow back to the full volume very quickly.
And I understand that just 1%, you know, that essentially survived. They were all sort of genetically linked in some way. They were all one part of the genetic tree. So it really told us that there was some selection that helped aliens have certain genetics.
Or at least these planet hoppers.
At least these, I appreciate
because these were complex communities that were sent up, and it helps us narrow down the kind of the areas on the tree of life.
Wow. And fantastic. For those OU students watching us here, just imagine, you know, Alex is busy here as a PhD student at the OU doing exactly this kind of research. That's exactly what he's doing day in, day out here at the Open University.
Dream job.
Alex, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. He just said dream job if you didn't hear. Okay, please keep those questions coming. We have got a few questions that we're going to take and then wrap up in the last 5 minutes. So, we have a question here from Andrew Winnard. There's
Yes,
a name
our
we
friend,
might recognise. Hi Andrew, how are you? It's good to hear from you. He says, how long do microbes survive while exposed? Is it long enough to reproduce? We might need Alex back.
That is a good question.
Alex!
I know
Come back!
they've gone for at least 12 months before, I think. But
Yeah,
Alex is the expert.
Alex, come back.
Okay. What was the question again?
How long do microbes survive while exposed? Is it long enough to reproduce?
Well, I mean, the exposed experiments, the first round, were 548 days exposed to space conditions, after which these things were reanimated. It's not necessarily that they grow in these conditions, because there's not really any nutrients or anything for them to be growing on. But quite a lot of microorganisms can go into dormant states, desiccated states, where they're very resistant to being killed off, but they're not actively growing. They're just surviving.
Just surviving. Okay. I
Job
hope
well
that helps, Andrew. Yeah, thank you, Alex. Good job you're here. Okay, very good. Well, we've come to the end of discussing the 4 60 seconds in microgravity videos, but we just thought we'd finish up by having a little bit of an outlook about, what next. We've looked at parabolic flights, the space station, drop towers, what we can do on the Earth, going for bed rest. But the space station is going to end hopefully 2024, maybe 2020, hopefully 2024. What's going to happen after that, Andrew? What's on the horizon from a UK Space Agency perspective about what next?
That's a good question. And that's really what I spend a lot of my time thinking about, is kind of, what happens after the current phase. So really the big change I think we're going to see towards the end of this decade and through the 2020s is not just big institutional space programs, but more commercial providers coming on board. So there'll be a big diversification of the different types of microgravity facilities we could have. So there'll be commercial spaceflight providers operating suborbital flights. So some of these flights that we see a lot in the press about for space tourism, well, if tourists are going up, we might as well stick some science on as well. So, so I imagine that there'll be good
Give me a
opportunities
free ride.
there. Yeah. So that's one area. There's a lot to talk about CubeSats as well, and that's one platform where.
What's a CubeSat?
So a
Maybe not
CubeSat
everyone
is
knows a CubeSat.
indeed. So it's basically a very small satellite. So made up of cubes of 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters.
Quite little.
And
Not
sometimes a few of them
much
put together.
bigger than a phone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they piggyback on launches of bigger vehicles and then are released into orbit. And so that could be a quicker and more efficient way to get shorter duration experiments up there.
I have to say actually that from an end user perspective, actually there's a lot of interest in the microgravity community from these kind of platforms.
Mm-hmm.
When Dave was here a few minutes ago, he was talking about the duration and the quality of the microgravity. And these sound like two complicated science words, but they're very important. How long the microgravity we get is for.
Mm-hmm.
So in a drop tower, a few seconds. In a parabolic flight, 22 seconds. In the space station, actually in between good and bad microgravity, maybe a few days or a few hours, because actually some experiments can be sensitive to when they use the astronaut toilet or different things. So not as long as you might expect. Sometimes we can have suborbital flights. The Russians used to send something that looked like a Soyuz up and send it around the Earth a few times and bring it back down again. But actually this leaves quite a big space. There's a big gap between 22 seconds and a few days and of hours. And there's also quite a big gap between a few hours and a few months or a few years. So these kind of opportunities of suborbital flights really give us a great chance to get good quality microgravity in the future.
Yes, that's definitely one of the most exciting developments for us.
Okay guys, we have been giving you 60 minutes of discussion on microgravity, and I of course love talking and could go on all night long, but you probably have other things to do, and we've really enjoyed doing this. I want to start by thanking all of you for joining us today, for feeding in your questions, for giving Sabrina and Ben lots of typing to do while they've been here. I want to thank all our guests. I want to thank Andrew especially for joining us from UK Space
thanks for having
Agency.
me. Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun talking to you. And also especially to Dave and to Alex for coming down and sharing their work with us. And in particular, Ben and Alex and Sabrina and I for sharing the OU research. So all that remains for us to say is it doesn't stop here. The videos are still online. You can find them on YouTube. But more importantly, if you go to our Open Learn pages from the Open University, there are pages which show you much more about microgravity and give you all the links. And we're going to be posting those links right after we wrap up this event. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found this research a bit out of this world. Night night.
If you enjoyed this clip, feel free to follow the links on screen for more interesting articles and free courses from the Open University.